guys, welcome.
Oh, no verbiage. It was like,
Hey,
hey, welcome to our pod.
welcome to another daytime episode. We have so much energy. We love this.
We love this. We all have stuff. And I don't know where you guys are located, but we're in Florida and today it is warmer. So my emotions are a little more up today.
Yeah, we've been waiting for this day. Like, finally, we have some good, warmer weather after that little test of whatever wills that we were just put through for 2 weeks.
I was in freaking purgatory for the last few weeks, guys. So we made it. We're here.
Yeah, here we are. Okay, so I guess this is our third episode of our trauma series, right? Um, And so we wanted to get a little bit more specific today and talk to you guys about some of the types of behavior that might elicit different kinds of trauma. So we've talked about very briefly and generally, some of the types of traumatic things and behaviors that might create trauma. But today we wanted to focus on like emotional traumas and some of the things that can transpire and lead up to that. So,
Yeah, I think emotional trauma. We've said this in like one of our other episodes where I think it was the emotional abuse because
yeah.
they go hand in hand, but I think it's like a hard thing because it's not something that's outward. Like when you think trauma, you think like again, there's physicality and physical aspects.
Yeah.
Or something you saw that was traumatic, but it's not. It's a sad reality that I think a lot of times people negate the emotional things that happen to people
Mhm.
because you can't somebody it's like when you explain them to somebody they don't physically see it or they don't understand it fully, so I think that's why it's like a hard topic for people to talk about.
Yeah. Okay, so since you brought up emotional abuse, I think it's important for us to do a little education that not all emotional trauma is from abuse, but all emotional abuse causes trauma.
Yes.
Okay, so that's an important distinction because I feel like sometimes when I'm working with someone who has a lot of emotional trauma and emotional baggage, they're like, well, I didn't have anything like abusive happen to me, so like, why do I feel this way? Other stuff happened, guys. Like, this is, so I think that that's definitely an important piece of education when we're labeling what we're going through to just be able to identify things the right way.
Right, so I think let's give them, if you can define, and we'll go on a little tangent about it for a second, like, so in your verbiage define the two and how they're different.
Okay, so, well, emotional abuse is a pattern of behavior that is characterized by, um, I mean, it's so complicated to explain in a simple way, but anything that someone can do to you to have an emotional effect that can undermine your ability to function normally without boundaries and defense mechanisms kicking into gear constantly to protect the self, that would be what we would categorize as something that is emotionally abusive. It can manipulate the way that your feelings exist in a way that is maladaptive.
Right.
So that, abuse is something that happens to a person. It's a behavior pattern. It is action, right? Whereas emotional trauma is a response. So the two things are not even the same. An emotional traumatic response is, like we've talked about, a reaction formation that is triggered by things you've experienced in the past or reminders of things that you've experienced that have initiated that trauma.
Right.
Would you agree?
It's I agree with you. And like when you're saying it, I'm like, we get it,
Yeah.
and maybe, and then there might be questions after we have that, which is fine. But I think it's a hard thing to understand when we don't have the emotional language to understand it, right? Because it all feels and sounds kind of similar in a way.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think that this is like such a huge part of trauma work and working through abuse and recovery is just going down to the basics and teaching the right words to describe what you're going through and really
Yeah.
have the vocabulary.
And I feel like I give a lot of examples because I feel like we all learn through examples, right? So the only thing I'm like right now, I'm like, what example can I have? The only thing that popped in my mind, and correct me if you disagree with this, but like I keep thinking like if somebody grew up with like say they were just like an orphan or really just were in foster care, like maybe nothing happened, like there was no abuse.
Yeah.
Let's say there was no emotional abuse. We're in foster care, maybe it was a nice foster care, and then you got adopted, right? And it's like, good, everything's great. But then later in your life, you have this response of like, you're so scared people are going to leave you.
Yeah.
right? So that can be like a emotional trauma response where you're like,
Sure.
I'm
Yeah.
with somebody, or like, are these people going to leave me? Am I? And it's like you feel it heavy, and like that is a response from a traumatic experience,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it doesn't really pertain abuse in any way.
Right.
If that does that example make sense? I'm trying to figure out a good example where people can figure out what is the difference between each of them.
Yeah. Okay. So another example that might be really relatable for a lot of young people in our age bracket would be um, always trying to overachieve, but never being able to quite make it to the expectations or standards of others, right? So, what does that generate? A pattern of emotional reactivity that in which anytime they go above and beyond and it doesn't seem to quite meet the expectations of others, now they feel like a failure. Now they feel like, why try? I'm deflated. I'm not even going to put effort into relationships. I have flexible boundaries with people because I need to please them. So that could be another example, right? Now, here's where we need to be a little bit educational and direct. How do you explain what a negative valenced emotion is compared to what an emotional response, trauma response is? Because the two things are kind of similar, but they're not exactly the same. When someone's like, I just have really powerful feelings, I'm really sad or I'm really angry all the time, or I'm very detached from people. What's the difference between, okay, we can parse through that and where that comes from, versus this is like emotional trauma here? Where's the difference?
I mean, I know this is a hard one. I would say one, I see how big it feels,
Yeah.
right? Because it's like hard when I think it's normal. Like there's a normal range, which there's no real definition of how to say what that range of feeling is. But usually when something feels a lot bigger, you're like, why is that there? It is usually a response from something
Right.
like a trauma where you're like,
Yeah.
me and you could go through the same thing and somebody says one thing and you're like, what the fuck? And you lose your shit. And I'm like, all right, I mean, yeah, I get that I did that.
Yeah.
Like, I don't have a reaction to it. And it's like, why did you have such a big reaction?
Yeah.
And I was like, Gabby, like, he just asked us a question. Like, what happened for you that didn't happen for me?
Yeah.
I would say that. But what would you say? I think there's probably multiple things to this question.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that it also depends on what your approach is to work with somebody because I think there's the type of counseling where it's a very, very distinct line. Well, these are just feelings that you haven't navigated versus this is a trauma response, right?
Yeah.
So I think where you and I operate out of personally in our work is it's a spectrum, right? You can have these feelings that are maladaptive, but we dig deeper for purpose. And where has this felt familiar? Where did you start hearing this voice, right? So I think it depends. I don't
Yeah.
know. Like, I have a new client and she's really amazing and very self aware, but, we kind of had to do the labeling last night of like, given what you've said to me, do you think that this is like sort of a little t trauma, this experience with these patterns of behaviors where this is why it's so pervasive and your mechanisms aren't working?
Right.
So, I think it depends on also the person's openness to redefining and recognizing what their experiences really have been, So there's that honesty component too.
Yeah, and I think the hard part of this topic is, again, when we talk about spectrums, when you said little t, I'm like, well, yeah, that's hard to, if we're talking about like emotional trauma,
Hmm.
that comes in so many ways too, which I think the hard part of even what you said at the beginning of like defining abuse and trauma
Yeah.
is hard to distinguish because like you kind of gave like little t, like if you grew up and nobody ever like validated something, then you
Yeah.
might be, damn, I do never feel good enough. And then that's something that's like, I did something. Oh, here we go. I never feel good enough. I feel super lonely. And then it's like, that's coming from my little t. Nothing extreme happened, but it was from an interaction.
Hmm.
Versus you might have had multiple things happen
Yeah.
and it's a consistent pattern. And then it's like, or you have family members that I think are I'm going to say slightly abusive. And I'm not going to say and I think I need to say this too because it's what my head keeps going. One of my clients had asked me if I thought abuse was always malicious, and I said no.
Yeah. Agree.
I think a lot of, things that we grew up with, like people aren't, do I think there are people that know what they're doing? Absolutely. I'm going to say that. They use it for manipulation and for a power play. That's a whole nother topic for another day, which we love, But I think there's just people that like have their own wounds and they don't know how to show up, and then they say things that cause emotional abuse, and it's like, oh, that abusive language,
Mm-hmm.
and then that becomes like we have another level of trauma.
Right.
You're hitting
Yeah.
multiple ways. I don't know. I'm kind of getting
Yeah.
confused. This is a hard thing to talk about because even me, see guys, even me, I'm like, it's so complex of a thing.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think we see this very profoundly in a lot of this recognition of, generational differences in the way that we would tackle certain issues. And when you see people in our generation, like speaking to their parents, like, did you recognize that that was happening in our dynamic? Did you recognize that you were doing that to me? And it's not very often even from a place of confrontation, but just of recognition where some of the patterns in ourselves are coming from. And the parents have no idea. They don't
Right.
even remember half the time. And they're, sometimes you get the denial, which happens, of course, but then sometimes you get that, wow, like, I didn't realize that's the way you were experiencing that. I thought I was just being strict, or I thought I was just being, very protective. Whereas the understanding of, well, that was sort of emotionally abusive to isolate
Right.
me from my friends as a punishment all the time, and I couldn't leave the house, or whatever our strict rules were. So I think that sometimes, like you said, it's not malintentioned.
Hmm.
And that's sometimes hard because this is such a polarizing topic of just recognizing like abuse is never right, but
Right.
it's hard to overcome it when you recognize that the person didn't have intention to hurt you. Now, is physical abuse ever one of those things where this is the case? I don't think so. I
No.
think that for sure when you're doing that. There are
Right.
people with personality disorders who know what they're doing and they're very aware of what they're doing and the outcome, right? But yeah, sure. I think that sometimes it is just patterns of behavior that are repeated and they're not corrected and they're not coped with properly. Sure.
Hmm.
I can argue that too, but sometimes that's why it's hard to recover from it too. Because you can look at, your matriarch in your family who is just a very grouchy, very horrendous person, for example, and
Yeah.
everyone hates this person, but well, that was still my family member. Like she didn't know what she was doing, really, but I'm not forgiving of that, right? Like I've heard that before. So I think that's why emotional and even like psychologically abusive stuff can be really tricky to work with because sometimes it's like, how much of this is me and my personality and how much of this is me being activated by something?
Right. And yeah, that's a very hard thing to distinguish because I think one, I'm going to say this, one, all of us have emotional trauma.
Yeah.
Like if we're talking about little T's and big T's, like that's the reality. Like we all have some toy, and I think, right, we've said this before where the word trauma is like thrown around, but in psych world we do say like it doesn't mean it's like this horrible bad thing. We're just putting a
No.
name to an experience and like how it's presenting itself. So like having people distinguish the difference between no, you're never gonna like to be criticized, right? Like present day, like I know I don't like it when somebody comes in and criticizes how I do something. But when I'm like very reactive, I'm like, is is part of me just not liking this? And part of me is like, oh, this was my whole fucking life. Versus I'm having a reaction because I'm just annoyed today. And then
Yeah.
somebody came and told me, hey, why don't you do it that way? And it's just like, I don't have fucking energy for this today. Right. Like,
Yeah.
and figuring out the patterns and how does it feel like for me at least I can tell, and I like again I don't think everyone's like this, but some things feel like they're burning my soul. That's how I describe
Yeah.
it. I'm like when something happens in my life and I'm like in even an okay headspace and I'm like that little remark just burned my soul.
Yeah.
I'm like there's no way I should feel this bad about one remark, and that's usually my sign that I'm like okay, that's just my work to keep doing of like reframing it and being like that's not that person's intention. Where did this come from? But it's a hard thing to distinguish because some days I'm just like, or maybe I'm just having a rough day today, so somebody could come in here and breathe wrong and I'm gonna have this emotional response too.
Yeah. Yeah,
It's
for
hard.
sure. It is hard. And, again, I think that the reason that this is so important to talk about, though, is because it's hard and because many people just push emotional trauma under the rug because it's heavy, and I don't know why I'm like that. I don't know why I get like that, but I just don't want to deal with it. So then they don't. And then it feels terrible when something activates you or triggers you. You know, I feel like that's a buzzword where everything is triggering, right? Well, when we're describing what that means, it's something that happens in your environment or in your situation that feels familiar in a dangerous way.
Yeah.
What is that? Not necessarily the identical thing, you know, and I feel like that's something that a lot of people who don't have an understanding of what a trigger is or what a flashback looks like, oh well, but I wasn't in that exact situation. So it couldn't have been that. You know, it couldn't have been, this isn't what was bothering me. It's surely not that issue I dealt with 10 years ago because
Right.
it was, you know, I was just like in a different situation. And it's just something about it. It can be a smell, it can be the overstimulation that you're feeling, it could be a person reminding you of something. Like the list goes on, and it's so important to really slow down, which is something that you and I like both do in our work. You know, let's explore this, let's be curious about it, let's open our eyes a little bit more broadly. Why did you have that anger? Where is it coming from? You know, is your anger hiding something else? And
Right.
it's about like having the right vocabulary to really look at that. Well, actually that was shame, and it
Yeah.
makes me angry to feel like ashamed of myself, or I'm grieving something. I'm
Right.
overwhelmed, you know?
Yeah. I had a client the other day, and I always think it's interesting when us as adults use this verbiage because I'm like, you can tell it's from like a wounded state when she was like, I was just really worried I was going to be in trouble.
Yeah.
And I was like, I slowed her down. I was like, well, like, so what does that feel like in your body? Like, do you really think you're going to be in trouble at work? Like, with another grown adult? Like, when you say it logically, right? When you're like, as a grown adult, me and another grown adult,
Hmm.
I can make a mistake and it's fine because that's humans do. But when you're in that state of like, oh my God, here's a big person that's my boss, I'm in trouble. I'm
Yeah.
like, what's that verbiage? So when anybody says I'm in trouble as an adult, I'm like, oh, little kid state. Like, where? And I was like, do you think that? She goes, no, I know I actually want to be. And I'm like, well, what is trouble? And she was like, I don't know, but my heart's racing already. And it was like an interesting thing to be like, she's
Wow.
already having a body response to an emotional thing. Then we did start talking about her history. She's like, I just feel like if I wasn't perfect, which was her, it's her coping, if I can just be perfect, then
Hmm.
nobody's upset with me. So I'm like, okay, so it's not trouble. Your version of trouble is your nervous system, like not wanting people upset with you
Yeah.
because people always were just mad at you when you were younger and it didn't feel good. And you didn't know what to do after that. So then your coping is perfectionism. So then at work it plays out. And I'm like, that's a nervous system issue in the trauma. Like your body's basically like, we don't want to go here.
Right.
And it was like this sad thing. So like you have to be nice to your body. Like you have to eventually be like, we're at work and we're safe. Like we're not gonna be in trouble.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to watch the language pop out like that. Like as soon as I ask somebody to define trouble, like usually people can't. But
Yeah.
your body like, this is what trouble feels like though. So it's little things like that that we think are like not a big deal. And this woman doesn't have crazy abuse or crazy trauma in her history. It's just that emotional, there was an absent, emotional parent,
Yeah.
of, my parents worked a lot.
Hmm.
So I was just trying to make them proud and wanting attention and all this simple stuff that we all struggle with. So I think
Yeah.
it's just interesting how it plays out in present day when we don't. Why I said we all have emotional trauma is I think, we're finally in that generation where people are like, therapy is normal and and understanding how emotions work and people are more interested in it. Where, back in the day, it's like it was just suck it up, get over it. Like, this isn't traumatic, this is nothing, emotions are weak. And
Yeah.
the research has just changed that dialogue for us, which now we have a
Hmm.
whole generation of people that do have emotional trauma.
Right. Now, here's a question for you, because I think also where a lot of people are under the misconception that if you have emotional trauma wounds, it will always manifest as emotional dysregulation. What's your take on that? Because the way that I look at it, so you can have a second to think about it, very often it's not, it's a numbing and it's more prevalent in the body, like what we talked about. You know, why do I feel so agitated when I'm emotionally activated? Whereas I think I've had clients be like, I don't think I have any like emotional issues because I'm not sad or I'm not angry or I'm not volatile all the time.
Well, see, I would define that as an emotional issue.
Right. Me too.
See, I would be like, okay, well, it's kind of like when you have somebody who shuts down,
Yeah.
but somebody who loses their shit, and you're like, they're both a reaction.
Right.
It's just the sad reality of people. We've talked about this in an anger episode, I think, when we first started the podcast. Like,
Yeah.
angry people get a bad rap because they're outward and they're causing disturbance and they're being rude and ignorant and they're showing themselves, right? But what about the person who's just like, I'm gonna just shut off and numb myself out and just sit in the
Yep.
corner and be quiet? Like, that's an emotional reaction. It's just because it doesn't cause anybody else
Discomfort.
discomfort, it's more like looked upon as healthier when it's not.
It's not.
So like when people are like, I don't feel much, I'm like, well, that
That's
is
a
just
problem. Yeah,
Yeah.
that is a problem. And the way there's the middle, like everything in moderation, right? If you have outbursts, we need to make that such that your anger can exist in a way that aligns with your integrity, right? Like that's the way I describe to people. You're not happy being angry, but you feel guilt about being angry because you're not an angry person. So you're allowed to feel anger. You're allowed to feel sadness and guilt and shame and disappointment and resentment and hatred. Like you're allowed to feel those
Right.
things. But sweeping it under the rug until it comes up and creeps up on you like this insurmountable monster is bad. But then impulsively lashing out every time you have that impulse to feel is also bad. Bad.
Right. So in the therapy I do, we call that, we start looking in history more, or in general, we call it a containment figure. Like, where did somebody teach you to be able to feel anger but contain it? Where it's not you being crazy and breaking stuff and like punching people. Like, you're not reacting where it's harmful, but you still have a place that like, hey, like it's like, in parenting, like your kids are allowed to be mad at you. They're going to be mad at you. So how do you give them the space? Like, yeah, that's fine. You're allowed to be mad at me, but like in an appropriate way where I can keep you safe and that you're not ignorant and rude to me.
Right.
So you need to go scream in a pillow, go scream, like 100% feel it. But if people don't learn how to contain it, it's usually like, don't feel it, or it's this bad thing that you're not supposed to feel. So then it is under the rug. And then when people do feel it as adults, the emotional response to that is like, it feels too big where it can't be contained because you've never allowed yourself to feel it, where it's like, okay, now when I do feel anger, all of my years of anger hit me.
Yeah.
And now it's like, what do I do? That's why I think a lot of people are like, I'm scared to feel my anger.
Yeah.
Because it's like, what is it going to look like? Yeah.
Yeah. Right. It's so heavy.
It is.
Let's shift a little bit because we did mention like emotional abuse at the beginning of the episode. And I think this topic being so intertwined with that, it's important to look at that specifically. And I think we did a full episode on it, but more to come, guys. But I think it's important to teach a little bit about what emotional abuse can look like, because very often I feel, well, that person is just difficult. That person's just stubborn. That person is just, he's a yeller. She just likes to have things a certain way. Like there's a lot of justification for manipulative, toxic, abusive behavior. So how do we explain to someone when they're describing a person in their life who caused them undeniable harm in an emotional way? How do we look at someone and say that this is what it was? Like what to look for?
I think that's a huge topic. I mean, I think there's things we can throw out now, but I think we're gonna need a whole episode. Like,
yeah.
I also think about, when you say that, I think about the Gottmans. They have their 4 pillars. I don't even know if I know them all in the top of my head, but like they teach in a way that's like, hey, these are red flaggy. Like that's why they can deem if a relationship's gonna fail.
Yeah.
What the Gottmans are, they're lead researchers in like relationships, and they're like, because they teach about like, cussing at each other, like that's not healthy. Like that can lead into abusive behavior, right? Because if you're always like, I can call my partner names,
Right.
like that's not it. So that,
No.
and I think I think the hard thing about even me when I say this out loud, because I'm not going to say I haven't done this
Right.
in the history of me dating. No, like I have my own issues. So like, it's like, how are you going to take accountability to be like, hey, these behaviors do become abusive if you're going to consistently do them to somebody that is. So yeah, can you slip up and be like, I called this person a name in a fight, but like, hey, I know that wasn't right. Like I can't make that a pattern, right? So there's that. I know the Gottmans talk about stonewalling, like that cutoff of like, I'm going to ignore you.
Yeah.
And no, I have a lot of couples that struggle with that, because it's like, how long do you can ask for space, but like to just ignore your partner for days at a time because you're like, you don't either know, no, you're doing it on purpose because you do want to punish them, or you just don't know how to handle your own emotions. So you're like, I'm just not going to explain that I need space and like kind of fuck them vibe.
Yeah.
Like that's a sign. I don't know what the other two. There's four of them. I'll have to bring them. I'll have to look them up to have like a whole
Okay, I
episode.
just pulled them up. So there's commitment, attunement, trust, and shared commitment of meaning and value.
Okay. I
So
think that I don't know if those are the ones I was talking about then, but I know they have pillars because I know one of them's contempt. I know which is to be like the cussing at each other, the stonewalling. They basically just look at the language you have for each
yeah,
other too. But I know those are the two that always stick out for me because I see those ones a lot in couples. How often do couples ignore each other? What
hmm
is their verbiage toward each other? Are they like kind of you're dissing each other in a fight and you're gonna like what we talk about with gaslighting, I'm gonna like bring you down and like kind of just like flip it on you, but also like let me tell you about yourself because I want to hurt you. And again, that might happen occasionally, but when it becomes this pattern in your relationship, it's red flaggy. Those things, and I think a lack of accountability on each end, I think is a red flag. If you're always the problem,
yeah,
I think that's something to look at when that the other person can never own their own stuff and say, "You're right, like I'm part of this too."
yeah.
Then why is it only one person to blame? But what comes up for you? Like, what things would you throw out?
Isolating of a partner or a person from their support network is huge. I think also weaponizing silence is huge, which is sort of one of the things that I think you were mentioning. Belittling for sure. Also fracturing trust. And I think what I mean by that is constantly putting someone through little tests to make sure that they can trust you. That's
Yeah,
so like twisted to me. Like
like
you
a prove thing, like prove
yeah.
yourself to
Yeah,
me, and
right.
it's
Prove yourself that I can still trust you.
right.
And weaponizing small moments as evidence for a bigger problem that doesn't exist. All of these things are very abusive, right? Like, oh, I had a client that was dealing with this with her partner where she didn't tell him that she was stopping home on the way home to go get eggs or something. I don't remember what it was. He lost his mind because she was like 10 minutes later. Oh, where did you go? Oh, I went to the store. Oh, so you lied. You didn't tell me you were going to the store. You told me you were coming straight home. And she's like, here are the eggs, right? Like, what do you mean? And it was an immediate warfare. For now it's oh, well, I can't trust you because you don't keep me in the loop. Now I want your location. Now I want, and it's just a means of asserting any type of control possible, right? Don't talk to this friend. Don't talk to that friend. You can't go out with your friends without me. Also, double standards too in a relationship, I think are huge emotional abuse, right?
That could be
You
a whole
want the
episode for
boys.
me. Saying what the double standards and the hypocrisy of relationships will forever and always trigger my soul.
Me too. Yeah, right. Like I can go out with my boys and drink until 3 in the morning, but you go out on a girls' night and you're out an hour later than you said, you must be cheating,
Right.
right? Like get the
Yeah.
actual F out of here. What? You know? So, when things like that happen, though, this is what we want you guys to look for. Things like that happen in your relationship where you feel icked, right? Because naturally, that's something, all of these things that we just listed are things that you should be uncomfortable with. This is not
Right.
healthy.
Can we add this? We're not saying that this is like if this happens, it's totally abuse. Your relationship is abusive. It's things to look at and like you that example you gave.
Yeah.
I I'm not like saying it's healthy by any means, right? It's not. It's not like, okay, your partner stays out, but like what is the effort to try to understand you? If it's always like that and they're allowed to do everything, but you're not. We're talking about consistent patterns here. And it's like not somebody saying like I looked up the Gottman stuff and one of them is defensiveness. It's
Yeah.
like, oh, you're right. I did stay out till 3. I don't know why I get so upset with you, why you actually stay out an hour later though.
Right.
Like it is weird. I've never thought about that. That's normal relationship stuff. Like now we can have like healthy conversation argument rather than it doesn't matter. I'm still allowed to do it and you're the problem.
Yeah.
So
Right.
just want to be clear with
Yeah,
that.
well, yeah, exactly. If it's a pattern where this is something that is always one-sided, you're never heard, there's no opportunity to make it mutual and even and equal and understanding, where conversation can happen and improvements can be made, that may be something where you're like, here's a red flag. Okay, this is not healthy. It's not good. I feel controlled. I feel uncomfortable. That is a situation where you may want to do some reflection about, how do I feel about this? Well, as a result, I feel like I'm not trustworthy. I question my loyalty. I question myself. I feel like I could be abandoned or rejected at any moment because clearly I have to work harder to earn this person's trust. Like, all of that is not okay. You feeling differently about yourself because of another person's manipulation or emotional control over you is not okay.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that we have to be more open to the fact that if the other person is defensive, they are not willing to see your side, they're not willing to hear you out for having an emotion about it either. That's the other thing, right? If someone says, well, I don't really think I did anything wrong, but also your feelings are wrong.
Right.
That's a problem, because the other person may have zero insight and be like the least self-aware person on the entire planet and be like, well, I don't think what I did was wrong. But if they say, but okay, I'm sorry that you're upset, you know, how can I help us get through this, right? Then there's motion. Okay, well, help me understand why you're feeling that way. But if they're like, yeah, you're upset about nothing, I didn't do anything wrong, then you're like, whoa, okay, so I'm a lose-lose on this deal, no matter what. That's not healthy. That's not what a relationship is. You know, I have a hot take. Relationships are transactional. They are. Okay? People hate to hear that because, oh, it sounds like a business. You can't give 100%. And the other person gives 0. And they can't give 100% and you give 0. Because what happens when you give 90% all the time and they give 0? You're going to start giving less and less and less. So then there's nothing happening. It is a give and take. It's about being respected. It is about being heard and seen and supported, right? So if that's not happening in both directions, we got nothing to work with here.
Right. It takes two. It does take two. It is transactional. It's not like I'm with this person because I'm trying to gain something from them. Like, that's not what we're saying. But it is like a relationship, even a friendship, right? It's like, I want to help and be with this person and hang out with this. It's a one on both ends. It's not one person wanting it and the other person like, I don't have to put any effort in.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, we don't have relationships are not maintained out of the goodness of your heart ever. You know, and there's no even saint on this planet that is going to do that. That's just not human. It is not human to feel taken advantage of, or as if the other person is so high above you that you can never meet their standard, you can never be as good as them. They're on a pedestal. That's not healthy.
Right. And it's not sustainable longevity. So
no.
But anyway, team. Okay, because here's the thing. Me and Gabby are going to go on a tangent again because we're like on. And so I was like, we need a bookmark because now my mind's like, okay, there's a whole bunch of other things I think we need to like maybe address about emotional abuse. And I think it would be good to look at the Gottman stuff, and break it down because they do it a lot. And I know when you do couples counseling, at least a lot of therapists look at their pillars of what's going on. It's like one of the other ones is criticism when I looked it up. So it's like, do you work on your criticism with your partner? Like, how often they talk a lot about bids for connection, and when you're criticizing, you're like disconnecting. So, and all of us can be critical to some point, but it's like, is that person doing it to always bring you down? Right? Or are they willing to work on it? So I think there's a lot of pillars in those things that we could talk about that are, again, just behaviors, but it's hard to do. And I think that's a thing we need to maybe go in more depth. There is a difference between like all couples in relationship issues do have issues versus the patterns and what to look for where it's going south, where you're like, wait, abort mission. Like, hey, I know this is not a healthy behavior that a relationship has versus I'm in an abusive relationship. Like I labeled abuse for one of my clients and he was like, you really think so? And I was like, you guys are 100% toxic. 100%.
Right.
Like, if nobody's ever told you that, I'm going to be the one to be like, if this is what's going on, 100% toxic on both your parts. And he was like, I thought so, but I've been in it for so long that I started questioning maybe everyone's relationship is just, maybe this is normal. Because to him, it's normal at this point when you've been with somebody for 15 years,
Ugh, so hard.
So, yeah.
Okay,
So
good stuff for you guys because this is obviously a big series, a big topic. And as usual, if you have feedback, thoughts, experiences, please share with us because we would love to hear them and help you guys out as much as we can. So,
Yes.
okay, till next time.
Until the next trauma scene.